You ever wonder how fast the gas comes out of one of these little canned air dusters? Maybe not. What about one of these compressed air guns? Or even the tiny little holes in a ball needle hooked up to one of these compressed air guns? As it turns out, and as I found out recently, it's faster than you might expect. Let's take a look. Today we have a brief departure from our typical content of precision engineering and machining to look at an interesting little discovery I made while using some of this canned air duster the other day. I was holding it up to a light, very similar to this, and just like sometimes how you can see the heat rising up the road, when you spray this canned air at the interface between the light and the ceiling here, you can see the gas coming out of it. It's not actually filled with air, it's filled with difluoroethane, which is much denser than air, and so it causes a bit of a warbly effect as the refractive index changes in the gas. Now, this is interesting because you can see when I pull the trigger a little bit, the gas come out. When I pull the trigger all the way, what I thought I saw was little Mach diamonds in the flow. Now, I thought I was just seeing things because surely there's no way this little can could be producing a supersonic flow out of the end. But as it turns out, that's exactly what I was seeing. Mach diamonds, of course, being the periodic pattern of shock and expansion waves that emanate from a supersonic nozzle when the pressure is not exactly the same as ambient when the flow leaves it. Depending on whether or not you have an overexpanded or underexpanded nozzle, the pattern is a bit different. Here are the two different cases here. But the point I'm trying to make here is this pattern, which you generally see in, jet engine or rocket exhaust, is only indicative of a supersonic flow. It's shock waves, so by nature it has to be supersonic. This phenomenon is easy to see in the mentioned rocket exhausts because these are combustion events, and when you have the shock waves collapse and the density increases, you get a brighter spot in the exhaust. But how do we see these for flows which do not involve combustion and may even involve just air, where the density and temperature is very similar to that of the ambient atmosphere? That's where Schlieren comes in. This really isn't meant to be a tutorial or a lesson, and many of you are probably already familiar with the technology, but for those who aren't, this is how it works. You put your object or whatever you want to view in here, or whatever flow is of interest, and essentially what this imaging setup gets you is something that's extremely sensitive to changes in refractive index and how they bend the light. So what causes a change in refractive index? Well, change in density most of the time, and so that can be caused either by heat or another thing that changes density, shock waves, right? Because they're basically just step functions in density. So this is what we're going to use to take a closer look at the flow coming out of these sorts of nozzles. So this is basically all you need, right? An imaging lens, a knife edge, an image sensor. This is just a webcam with the lens taken off. Then you need a source of very collimated light coming from somewhere out in the far field over here, and you can do whatever you want and project the image onto the sensor. Pretty straightforward. I cobbled together a really super janky system the night I first saw what I thought to be Mach diamonds, and it looked like this. This is barely functional, but it did serve the purpose, and I was able to get these images and videos that you see here. Now they're really blurry and terrible, and I'll explain why in a second, but I don't know about you, but it seemed to me to prove that we were observing supersonic flow coming out of this canned air, which is pretty impressive. The vapor pressure of difluoroethane is only 70 something psi, and this is a really long, thin tube. So the fact that that's enough to accelerate it up to the speed of sound, or greater than that, is fairly impressive. The speed of sound, to be fair, is lower in this case because the stuff is coming out colder and the gamma is different, and aerospace stuff. But this was a start, definitely encouraging, and so I took it a little bit further. So the reason for the crappy results the first time were twofold. One, the optics I was using was just garbage. It was, like $3 kids' toy lenses. And the other reason was that my light source was not a nice, well collimated beam. The way I was doing it is I was just putting a pinhole over a flashlight and then using a collimating lens to try and focus and collimate the beam that way, keeping it all, on a very short length scale. And because of the poor optics, I just wasn't able to get a good collimated source with nice parallel rays. And I thought for a while about a way to solve this problem, but then I realized the solution: just put it very, very far away. So with the light source down there, over this long distance, the approximate sphere emanating from it gives almost perfectly parallel rays once it gets down to this point, well over 100 feet away. And that ends up solving the problem pretty nicely. I also took apart a cheap old scope that we had lying around and pulled the main objective lens out of the front of that. This is still not a super great lens, but it's definitely better than what we had before. And then I started playing around and putting flows in it. And let's take a look at what we got. So here is the canned air set up in the Schlieren. You can see the little red straw there coming off of it. I'm going to start here just by pulling the trigger lightly. So this is not supersonic yet. You can only see the flow because it's difluoroethane. It's denser than air, and it has a different refractive index, so you can see the flow coming out, even when it's going really slow and laminar like that. As I start to pull the trigger a little harder here, you can see the jet starts to transition into a turbulent jet towards the end and works its way back. And then here at the end, I'm going to pull the trigger all the way, and you'll start to see some shock waves emanating from the end of the straw there, right there. But unfortunately, I've pulled the trigger for a long time at this point, so the cans started to cool down. We've lost pressure, and they're pretty bunched up and harder to see. Here in this next clip, I let it warm up a little bit more, so we get a higher pressure, and I'll go straight to full trigger, and you can see some beautiful shock waves coming off there. Later on, I swapped out the lens to this other one that got us a little bit more zoom and a slightly more even field, and this is just a nice zoomed in shot that lets you see the details on the shock waves a little nicer. Really awesome. Next, we'll try some compressed air. So this is just hooked up to shop air, 90 psi. This nozzle here is just a converging nozzle with a small hole in the end, and so the air that's going to come out of it is going to be underexpanded, and those are the shock waves that you get from that. It's really crazy. It looks like rocket exhaust, but it's just compressed air, and you play with it every day, but you'd never know that those shock waves are going on. This is an overexpanded nozzle where the exit area is larger than the choke point area, the throat area, and so the pressure as it comes out is lower than ambient. And there's a beautiful picture there showing the shock waves that you get as a result. You can compare that to the previous one where we were getting underexpanded flow. Now this is my favorite, I think. This is a little ball inflating needle that you use, for footballs and soccer balls, that sort of thing. And look at this. You've got shock waves coming out of both holes. You'd never expect it. But you see the main flow coming out of the front, and then that side hole has its own little series of oscillating expansion waves and shock waves. It's just mind-blowing that this is, it's a very unintuitive result. Here's that flow interacting with an edge You can see some expansion waves coming off of it there. And then here's a blowtorch. So right now I'm just pulling the trigger, letting a little gas out, and then I'll light it here. And you can see how that changes dramatically. This is the flame sort of slowed down, so we get a nice sort of laminar flame almost. And then if I pull the trigger harder, you can see it starts to push that flame front forward. And just really, really crazy looking. But yeah, that's about it. Hope you guys enjoyed. This was a really fun little experiment to do, and a really fun, unintuitive result that I never would have expected. So now you know. That's how fast, regular shop air and canned air is going. Hope you guys enjoyed. See you next time.